The sun beat down mercilessly. Heat haze shimmered on the horizon. A lone figure, Faisal, stumbled through the desert. He was exhausted, parched, lost. Faisal had been separated from his group 2 days ago, caught in a sudden sandstorm. Now his supplies were gone, his hope dwindling. Just when his vision started to blur, he saw it, an oasis. Palm trees swayed gently. A shimmering pool of water beckoned. Faisal had stumbled upon Khānkah, a place whispered about in hushed tones by desert nomads. A place they said was cursed. Faisal, desperate for salvation, ignored the stories. He staggered towards the oasis, unaware of the darkness that awaited him. The air grew cooler as Faisal approached the oasis. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sand dunes. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the harsh golden light of the day. As he walked, the crunch of sand beneath his feet was the only sound that accompanied him. The oasis, a small patch of green in the vast desert, seemed almost surreal in the fading light. The silence, however, was unsettling. It was as if the desert itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The usual sounds of nature were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that made the hairs on the back of Faisal's neck stand up. He had been to many oases before, but none had ever felt quite like this. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. The usual cacophony of life that one would expect in such a place was missing. It was as if the oasis was a painting, beautiful but lifeless. The only movement came from the occasional ripple in the water, disturbed by the gentle breeze. Just the whisper of the wind through the palm fronds. The sound was soft, almost like a sigh, as if the trees themselves were whispering secrets to each other. Faisal couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the oasis was aware of his presence. He reached the pool of water. It was a small, clear pool surrounded by lush vegetation. The sight of it was a relief, a promise of respite from the harsh desert. He knelt down, his hands trembling slightly as he cupped the cool water. It was crystal clear, reflecting the azure sky. The water was so clear that he could see the pebbles at the bottom, each one perfectly distinct. It was as if the pool was a mirror, reflecting not just the sky but also the tranquility of the oasis. Faisal drank deeply, the cool water reviving his parched throat. The sensation was almost euphoric, a stark contrast to the dry, dusty air he had been breathing. He closed his eyes, savouring the moment, feeling the life return to his weary body. As he drank, he heard it, a low humming sound. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew steadily louder. He opened his eyes, looking around in confusion. The sound was unlike anything he had ever heard before, a strange, melodic hum that seemed to resonate with the very air around him. It seemed to emanate from the ruins of an old caravanserai, half hidden amongst the palm trees. The ruins were ancient, their stones worn smooth by centuries of wind and sand. They stood as silent sentinels, guarding secrets long forgotten. The humming seemed to pulse from within the stones, a haunting melody that beckoned him closer. Faisal, curiosity piqued, decided to investigate. He stood up, wiping the water from his lips, and began to walk towards the ruins. Each step felt heavy, as if the very air was thickening around him. The humming grew louder, more insistent, drawing him in like a moth to a flame. He pushed aside a curtain of vines, revealing a courtyard choked with sand and weeds. The humming grew louder. The courtyard was overgrown, nature reclaiming what had once been a place of human activity. The sand and weeds seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the hum, creating an almost hypnotic effect. Faisal felt a shiver crawl up his spine. He was not alone. The feeling of being watched intensified, and he could almost sense eyes on him, hidden in the shadows. The humming was now a constant presence, filling the air with its eerie melody. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. The courtyard was bathed in an eerie silence, broken only by the incessant humming. Faisal's heart pounded in his chest. He drew his keffiyeh across his face, shielding himself from the dust. A flash of movement caught his eye. A shadowy figure darted behind a crumbling archway. Faisal froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife tucked into his belt. "Hello?" Faisal called out, his voice trembling slightly. Only the wind answered him. He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes scanning the shadows. He felt a cold dread grip his heart. The humming, the shadows, the oppressive silence. It all felt wrong. Faisal knew he had to leave, but something compelled him forward. Section 4. The Unsettling Discovery. Faisal cautiously approached the archway. The air was thick with an unexplainable tension, as if the very walls of the ancient building were whispering secrets long forgotten. Each step he took echoed softly, amplifying the eerie silence that surrounded him. His heart pounded in his chest, a rhythmic drumbeat of both fear and curiosity. The humming was deafening now, vibrating in his very bones. It was as if the sound was alive, a sentient force that sought to communicate with him. The vibrations grew stronger with each step, resonating through his entire being, making it difficult to think clearly. He wondered if he was the only one who could hear it, or if the entire world was oblivious to this otherworldly sound. He peered around the corner, his breath catching in his throat. The shadows seemed to dance and shift, playing tricks on his eyes. Every creak and groan of the old building made him jump, his nerves frayed to the breaking point. He felt as though he was being watched, but by whom or what he could not tell. In the center of the room, bathed in an eerie, pulsating light, was a strange device. The light seemed to pulse in time with the humming, casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. The device was unlike anything Faisal had ever seen, a blend of ancient craftsmanship and futuristic technology. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a relic from a time and place beyond his understanding. It resembled a large metallic orb covered in intricate carvings and symbols. The carvings seemed to tell a story, one that was both ancient and eternal. Faisal could feel the weight of history in those symbols, as if they were a key to unlocking the mysteries of the universe. He reached out to trace the lines with his fingers, feeling the cold, smooth surface beneath his touch. Wires and tubes snaked out from its base, disappearing into the floor. They pulsed with a faint, eerie glow, as if carrying some unknown energy to and from the device. Faisal wondered what their purpose was, what kind of power they were channeling. The entire setup looked like something out of a science fiction novel, yet it was real and right in front of him. As Faisal stared, transfixed, the humming abruptly stopped. The sudden silence was almost as jarring as the noise had been. It was as if the world had been holding its breath, waiting for this moment. The stillness was oppressive, pressing down on him from all sides. He felt a sense of foreboding, as if something monumental was about to happen. The light emanating from the orb flickered and died. The room was plunged into darkness, the only illumination coming from the faint glow of the wires and tubes. Faisal's eyes struggled to adjust, and he felt a wave of panic rising within him. He reached out blindly, trying to find something to hold on to, something to ground him in this surreal experience. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. It was a silence that seemed to have a life of its own, wrapping around him like a shroud. Every sound he made, every breath he took seemed amplified in the oppressive stillness. He felt utterly alone, cut off from the world outside, trapped in this ancient, mysterious place. Faisal felt a chill run down his spine. It was a cold that seemed to seep into his very soul, a primal fear that he couldn't shake. He knew he was on the brink of discovering something incredible, but he also knew that whatever it was, it would change him forever. The weight of that realization settled heavily on his shoulders. He cautiously approached the orb, drawn by an unknown force. It was as if the device was calling to him, beckoning him closer. He felt a strange connection to it, a sense of destiny that he couldn't ignore. Every step he took felt like a step towards his own fate, a journey into the unknown. He reached out a hand to touch it, but a voice echoed through the chamber, stopping him dead in his tracks. "Do not touch that!" The voice was commanding, filled with authority and urgency. Faisal froze, his hand hovering inches from the orb. He turned slowly, trying to see who had spoken, but the darkness revealed nothing. The voice had come from nowhere and everywhere, a disembodied warning that sent a fresh wave of fear through him. Section 5. A Race Against Time. Faisal whirled around, his heart pounding. The air was thick with tension and every second felt like an eternity. He could hear the faint ticking of a clock somewhere, each tick amplifying the urgency of the moment. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation he found himself in. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the harsh sunlight, was an old woman. Her presence was both eerie and commanding, as if she had been waiting for this very moment. The light behind her cast long shadows, making her appear almost otherworldly. Her eyes, dark and intense, seemed to pierce through him. They held a depth of knowledge and experience that Faisal couldn't fathom. It was as if she could see right into his soul, understanding his fears and uncertainties. "Who are you?" Faisal stammered, his hand still hovering near his knife. "What is this place?" His voice wavered, betraying his fear. He had so many questions, but he wasn't sure if he wanted the answers. The knife in his hand felt like a flimsy defense against the unknown. The old woman's face softened slightly. There was a hint of sadness in her eyes, as if she had seen too much in her lifetime. She took a step forward, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "This is a place of great power," she said, her voice raspy with age. "And great danger." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Faisal felt a chill run down his spine. He knew he was in over his head, but there was no turning back now. "You should not be here." Her tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. Faisal could sense the urgency in her voice. He wanted to protest, to ask more questions, but he knew it was futile. The old woman seemed to know more about his situation than he did. "But the humming, the orb..." Faisal began, but the old woman cut him off. Her eyes flashed with a mix of fear and determination. It was clear that whatever was happening, it was beyond his comprehension. "It is a beacon," she said urgently. "A signal that has been activated." Her words were like a punch to the gut. Faisal realized the gravity of the situation. This was no ordinary place, and he was no ordinary visitor. "And it has been activated. We must leave now." The urgency in her voice was unmistakable. Faisal felt a surge of adrenaline. He knew he had to trust her, even if he didn't fully understand what was happening. As if on cue, a low rumble shook the caravanserai. The ground beneath them trembled, and dust fell from the ceiling. It felt like the very foundation of the building was about to give way. Faisal's heart raced even faster. Cracks appeared in the walls. The ancient structure groaned under the pressure, and pieces of plaster began to fall. It was clear that they didn't have much time. The building was on the verge of collapse. The old woman grabbed Faisal's arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone her age. "There is no time to explain," she said. "We must run." Her words were a command, and Faisal knew he had no choice but to follow. They dashed through the corridors of the old building, the walls closing in around them. The rumbling grew louder, and the cracks in the walls widened. Faisal could feel the panic rising within him, but he pushed it down, focusing on the old woman's lead. He didn't know where they were going, but he knew they had to get out, and fast.